Ukrainian soldiers are inflicting extraordinary significant losses on Kremlin forces near the town of Volodar in the east, Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday night. In his nightly address on Telegram, he said that Ukraine's armed forces are leveling the situation and preparing for actions for the near future. He added, "Of course, military issues, details of intelligence operations are something that you cannot tell everything about. But I want our people to have predictability right now. And the feeling that Ukraine is moving towards its goals." Russians attack industrial area of Kramatorsk with 2 missiles. The Russians fired 2 missiles at an industrial area in Kramatorsk. 2 enemy missiles struck the industrial area of Kramatorsk. Honcharенko clarified that there were no casualties, but there was damage reported. In addition, the shock wave partially smashed windows in an apartment building. In a morning update, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported that Russia launched 25 airstrikes and 10 missiles targeting Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia oblasts on February 19. The Russian forces also launched 62 attacks from rocket salvo systems that day. The General Staff also reported that Russian forces are creating illegal imprisonment units for Ukrainian citizens suspected of collaboration with Ukrainian armed forces and holding pro-Ukrainian views in administrative buildings in some localities in Kherson Oblast. The Ukrainian Air Force has launched 29 strikes on the enemy's temporary bases, their anti-aircraft missile complex, and other important targets. As previously reported, the Ukrainian military downed Russia's Su-25 jet, a Soviet-era close air support aircraft, 2 Orlan-10 type unmanned aerial vehicles and 2 Lancet kamikaze drones. The Ukrainian army's resistance in the vicinity of Artyomovsk is persistent. However, on the front line, the newly called-up forces are mostly being engaged, military political expert Yen Gagin, advisor to the DPR leader, told TASS on Monday. Of course, they are not sitting on their hands there. Above all, the adversary is keeping the mobilized ones on the front line. They are calling people up constantly, because, in the opinion of the Kiev command, the mobilized can be spared. Only then they engage the career military and mercenaries, he said. That said, the official noted that lately, even artillery attacks on Donetsk, the DPR's capital, have been less intensive than before. The Ukrainian army lacks ammunition, and we have indeed destroyed a large amount of artillery, including American M777 howitzers and MLRS. And the adversary had to move the substantial part of artillery precisely to Artyomovsk and Ugledar. These are the 2 hottest fronts now, he added. Artyomovsk is in the Kiev-controlled part of the DPR and is a major transport hub for supplies to the Ukrainian grouping in Donbass. Major clashes to take over the city are underway. Russian troops took control of a number of communities in the vicinity of Artyomovsk, including Kleshchievka, Podgorodnoye and Pereskovivka. Russia will claim it has taken Bakhmut in line with the anniversary of its invasion, regardless of the reality on the ground, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence, MOD. In its latest intelligence update, the ministry has claimed Russian forces are continuing to pursue several offensives in the east of Ukraine, including in Volodar, Kreminna and Bakhmut. However, casualties reportedly remain high, and Moscow has suffered very high losses. The MOD added that as the February 24 draws closer, Vladimir Putin's troops will be under increased pressure to make progress in their offensives. It is likely that Russia will claim that Bakhmut has been captured to align with the anniversary, regardless of the reality on the ground, it stated. Bakhmut has been a key battleground during the war, with Russia recently making small gains in nearby villages. The region is a gateway to other cities further west in the Donetsk region and, although Ukraine has been holding its own, Volodymyr Zelensky has warned his forces can't defend it at any price. Russia likely lacks the reserves to dramatically increase the scale or intensity of their offensive in Luhansk this winter, the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, has said. The major phase of Russian offensive operations in Luhansk Oblast is underway, and Russia likely lacks sufficient uncommitted reserves to dramatically increase the scale or intensity of the offensive this winter, the ISW said. Russian forces almost certainly still have some reconstituted mechanized units in reserve, but the commitment of these limited reserves to the Luhansk Oblast frontline is unlikely to change the course of the ongoing offensive dramatically. The ISW also noted that Russian tank losses have been enormous so far, and it's hindering the country's ability to reconstitute its tank units quickly. Recent intelligence estimates presented by Dutch open-source investigative organization Oryx found more than 1,000 distinct Russian tank losses and 500 captured tanks 2 weeks ago. The ISW said this suggests Russia has lost half of its pre-war tank fleet in the first year of the war. Now, the country's ground forces are feeling the repercussions, with the losses meaning it is lacking the kind of punch required to make and exploit operationally significant breakthroughs. On the eve of the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there are ominous warnings the Ukraine conflict could widen and draw in other countries. America says China is considering entering the conflict as an active partner of Russia and will start sending weapons. And there are very real fears Vladimir Putin is stepping up efforts to destabilize countries from Moldova to the Western Balkans. That was the focus of an exclusive interview with Kosovo's President Vjosa Osmani at the Munich Security Conference. What he's trying to do is to divert the attention of the West away from Ukraine, she told Sky News. The way he would be able to do that is by creating other conflicts in Europe, whether we're talking about Moldova, Georgia, or the Western Balkans. As she spoke, pro-Russian politicians were rallying protesters in the Moldovan capital Chisinau. The country's government claims Russia is seeking to destabilize it. President Osmani says the Kremlin wants the same in Kosovo via its ally Serbia. She says Russia is using methods it employed in eastern Ukraine to foment civil war and destabilize the country in 2014. They tried to create false flag operations, she said. They bring in paramilitary forces that are dressed in civilians within our territory through illegal routes, and then they send in weapons, and they also send in green uniforms without insignia so that it doesn't look like a traditional military attack. But in fact, they do prepare a lot of hybrid attacks, which is a mix of what these paramilitary forces do in northern Kosovo. Kosovo won independence after the Kosovo War that followed the breakup of Yugoslavia and the intervention of NATO. Several countries, Serbia among them, do not recognize it. Kosovo accuses Russia of helping Serbia stir up separatism among the ethnic Serb minority in the country. President Osmani says the international community is not doing enough to deter Russia from meddling in her county and others. And as allies discuss how best to end the war in Ukraine, the Kosovan president warned against any territorial compromise with the Kremlin. Polish President Andrzej Duda is convinced that if Alexander Lukashenko, the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, orders his armed forces to engage in the war against Ukraine, it would mean a total end for his regime. There is no doubt that Lukashenko is trying to avoid Putin forcing the Belarusian army to enter Ukraine, to engage in open combat against Ukraine. Because, firstly, it would mean death for many Belarusians who have no combat experience and suddenly, badly armed, would face Ukrainians who have been fighting for many years and who are very determined to defend their homeland. Secondly, Belarusians are not a warrior nation. Belarusians do not want to fight, so they would have to be forced to go against their Ukrainian neighbors. Lukashenko knows very well that this will mean his ultimate end. Because, in my opinion, virtually the whole nation will go against him, then. The situation may turn out to be completely unmanageable for him. At the same time, Duda said that Poland did not actually recognize the Belarusian regime in a political sense. We believe that the elections, in 2020, were falsified, that the result absolutely does not reflect who is in power there today. We believe that this is usurped power, so we do not recognize it, the Polish president said. China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, has arrived in Moscow for talks on a possible peace plan for Ukraine, the Kommersant newspaper reported. The main purpose of his trip is to increase the role of Beijing in the Ukrainian settlement, Kommersant said. At the annual Munich Security Conference, Wang accused the United States of violating international norms with hysterical behavior. Wang reiterated a call for dialogue and suggested European countries think calmly about how to end the war. Wang also said there were some forces that seemingly don't want negotiations to succeed, or for the war to end soon, without specifying to whom he was referring. China's Xi Jinping will deliver a peace speech on the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, Italy's foreign minister said on Friday. Regarding Sweden and Finland joining the NATO alliance, according to Sputnik on February 20, a recent survey showed that a majority of Finnish parties said that the country could join NATO without Sweden if necessary. This comes amid a warning from Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. It will be bad for several parties if Finland were to be admitted to NATO alone, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has said, warning against leaving Sweden out. It will be bad for Sweden, bad for our immediate area, bad for NATO and for Sweden's ability to provide security together with Finland, Kristersson was quoted as saying. Kristersson also argued that the military cooperation between Sweden and Finland will be complicated if only the latter becomes part of the alliance. Kristersson's comments came after NATO first acknowledged the possibility that the two Nordic countries would have to join the alliance separately and possibly Finland would become a NATO member first. In May last year, Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO. However, the application was opposed by Turkey and Hungary. Turkey has repeatedly accused Sweden of harboring a group of Kurdish fighters that it considers extremists. Turkey's opposition to Sweden's membership has raised the question of whether Finland should join the alliance alone, despite the original intent of walking the NATO path together. In a fresh poll, the majority of Finnish parties said the country could join before Sweden if necessary. In particular, this view was supported by the main opposition parties, the centre-right National Coalition and the Nationalist Finns Party, as well as the Centre Party. The Left Alliance was the only party in the survey that was clearly against joining without Sweden. Tellingly, last year, the left was the most skeptical of the government's plans to join NATO as such. So far, however, joint accession remains officially a unanimous goal for the both nations. China's firm stance on the use of nuclear weapons was applauded at a panel discussion on the nuclear issue at the Munich Security Conference last Friday, as the 2023 Munich Security Report pointed out that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, secondary high inflation, energy crisis, and nuclear security issues have become new global security concerns. The discussion, themed Fallout, Challenges for Transatlantic Defense and the Nuclear Order, brought scholars and experts from around the world to share ideas on the world where the international arms control system has faced severe challenges over the past decade. One of the challenges in particular is the U.S. attempt to deploy intermediate-range missiles in many places around the world, which has aroused the vigilance of all countries after it withdrew from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF. The United States has been withdrawing from these agreements and treaties, the ABM, anti-ballistic missile, the INF, and also with other countries, the Treaty on Open Skies. The only thing we have left is the New START Treaty, and we have to keep it, but it's not certain that we can keep it, said Yao Yunzhu, honorary director of the Center for China-U.S. Defense Relations under Chinese Academy of Military Sciences. There is a whole package of very practical risk reduction measures to actually reduce the risk. That includes, of course, de-escalation measures. Restraint in rhetoric is another one, restraint in deployment of advanced weapon systems that might be perceived as escalatory, crisis communications. All of those practical risk reduction measures are really key and I would say, really urgent, said Izumi Nakamitsu, UN Under-Secretary-General for Disarmament Affairs. On the issue of the use of nuclear weapons, China has always advocated the complete prohibition and thorough destruction of nuclear weapons, opposed the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons, advocated that nuclear weapons should not be used and nuclear wars should not be fought, and prevent nuclear crises on the Eurasian continent. This position was unanimously welcomed by the guests attending the discussion. An urgent meeting of the UN Security Council, UNSC, will be held later on Monday to discuss the latest missile tests carried out by North Korea. Earlier in the day, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said that, following Pyongyang's Saturday ICBM launch and the Monday test firing of 2 ballistic missiles, Japan requested an extraordinary meeting of the UN Security Council, UNSC. North Korea has confirmed that it test-fired 2 missiles from a multiple launch rocket system, MLRS, on Monday morning, according to the state-run news agency. It said that the 2 missiles, fired toward the Sea of Japan, flew 395 kilometers, 245 miles, and 337 kilometers. South Korea's news agency reported early on Monday, citing South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, JCS, that North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles toward the Sea of Japan. The test firing was detected from the Sukchon area in South Pyongan Province between 7 a.m., 2200 hours Greenwich Mean Time on Sunday, and 7:11 a.m. local time, according to JCS. On Saturday, North Korea test-fired the Hwasong-15 intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. The launch was carried out from the Pyongyang International Airport and the missile reached a maximum altitude of 5,768 kilometers, 3,584 miles, covering a distance of 989 kilometers, according to the South Korean military. The strike on Damascus, which entailed human casualties and serious damage, was delivered by 4 F-16 fighter jets of the Israeli Air Force. Oleg Gurinov, deputy chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Parties in Syria, a division of the Russian Defense Ministry, said on Sunday. From 0:22 to 0:27 a.m. on February 19, four F-16 tactical jets on the Israeli Air Force delivered a missile strike on Damascus from the Golan Heights. As a result, the buildings of the Technical Institute of Applied Arts and the Center of Culture in the Kaft Souza neighborhood were destroyed, he said, adding that 5 people were killed and 15 more were wounded. Apart from that, according to Guranov, 4 Syrian soldiers were wounded near the settlement of Masharia as a result of a strike delivered from a drone launched by terrorists from the area of Maret Mukos. Guranov also said that 2 shelling attacks from the positions of the Jabhat al-Nusra terrorist group, outlawed in Russia, were reported in the Idlib de-escalation zone, 1 in the Idlib governorate and 1 in the Latakia governorate. The United Arab Emirates told the UN Security Council that it will not call a vote on Monday on a draft resolution demanding Israel immediately and completely cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, according to a note seen by Reuters. The UAE told Council counterparts in the note sent on Sunday that it will now work on drafting a formal statement, known as a presidential statement, PRST, which the 15-member Council has to agree by consensus. Given the positive talks between the parties, we are now working on a draft PRST which would garner consensus, the note said. Accordingly, there will not be a vote on the draft resolution on Monday. Much of the language of the PRST will be drawn from the draft resolution. The United States on Thursday voiced deep dismay at Israel's decision to expand Jewish settlements in occupied Palestinian territory and also described as unhelpful a push for the UN Security Council to denounce the move. The United Arab Emirates had on Wednesday circulated the text of a resolution to the Security Council that it had drafted in coordination with the Palestinians. The move came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government authorized 9 Jewish settler outposts in the occupied West Bank and announced mass construction of new homes in established settlements a week ago. The United States traditionally shields its ally Israel at the United Nations. But in 2016, President Barack Obama's administration abstained on a vote to allow the Council to adopt a resolution demanding Israel stop building settlements. Most world powers view as illegal the settlements Israel has built on land it captured in a 1967 war with Arab powers. Israel disputes that and cites biblical, historical, and political links to the West Bank, as well as security interests. After the Israeli government's announcement last week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he was deeply troubled. The draft council resolution put forward by the UAE would have reaffirmed that the establishment by Israel of settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. It also condemned all attempts at annexation, including decisions and measures by Israel regarding settlements. Electricity bills have soared across Japan since energy costs rocketed temporarily following the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine nearly a year ago. The energy situation is driven partly by European nations seeking to pivot their energy sources from Russia to other parts of the world. Japan relies on imports to meet most of its demand for liquefied natural gas, or LNG, a major energy source for thermal power plants. The Japan-Korea Marker, or JKM, is a benchmark index for spot prices of LNG cargo to East Asia including Japan. The index stood at some $20 per 1 million British thermal units before the invasion began on February 24 last year. But it soared to a record $84.7 per million BTU in March. It also topped $70 last August in response to a rise in energy demand. The index has since dropped and is currently below levels seen before the start of the Russian invasion. But last year's surges are pushing up electricity bills across Japan. Many households across the country subscribe to major utility firms under plans that cap how much the companies can pass on energy cost rises to consumers. All of Japan's 10 major electricity providers have raised their power bills as much as they can under government regulations. 7 of them have applied for regulatory approval to increase their rates above the ceilings from April or later. Roughly 9% of LNG imports to Japan comes from Russia in terms of volume. 2 Japanese trading houses retain stakes in the oil and gas project Sakhalin-2 in the Russian Far East despite international sanctions against Moscow for the invasion. But there are strong concerns about whether Japan will be able to continue securing sufficient amounts of LNG as it remains uncertain how Russia will act. The ancient Turkish city of Antakya, enjoying over 2,000 years of history and civilization in the southern province of Hatay, has been horribly toppled during the major earthquake that turned historic buildings to debris while tearing families apart. It is not the first earthquake that has brought devastating effect on the city, as the city lies in a zone of fractures that can easily cause earthquakes. About 80% of local buildings collapsed during the earthquake that rocked the south of the country earlier this month, and the old quarter with many historic architectures has been basically razed to the ground. Hussein, living in the old quarter, survived the disaster, but the loss is too much for him to take. There used to be restaurants, barbershops, clothing stores, and people went to work every day. Now, most of them have been destroyed, said Hussein. Hussein grew up listening to the stories of the ancient city, and traces of the tales could be found on the historic buildings. But the earthquake has taken away all of them, along with his friends and families in the neighborhood. We will never see them again, and we can only hope that they can remain in our memories for long, as they were beautiful memories, he said. International volunteers in Turkey's Hatay told Reuters on Sunday, February 19, they were motivated to help in the aftermath of the earthquake because of help their countries have received from Turkey. Like Turkey people do for us, we can do the same for them, said Ukrainian volunteer Artem, 34, from Kiev. In June, Lithuania's defense ministry said that Turkey's defense industry agency would donate a Bayraktar TB2 drone to Lithuania for transfer to Ukraine after Lithuanians crowdfunded nearly €6 million to buy it. Solomon Song, another volunteer from the US, said Turkish people had also helped Koreans. I'm Korean American, so I know these Turkish people help Koreans when we were having difficulties during the war, Song said. So I asked my friend, can we help Turkey? I think it's time to pay them back. Separately, a team of Australian rescuers were also in Hatay on Sunday. We want to say how sorry we are for the people of Turkey, how much love we have for them and support, and we just want to help with relief and disaster assistance, said Fire and Rescue New South Wales Station Officer, Scott Hanley. The death toll from the earthquakes that struck on February 6 has risen to 41,020 in Turkey, the Disaster and Emergency Management Authority, AFAD, said on Sunday. New Zealand warned on Monday the final cost of the devastating Cyclone Gabrielle could rise above $8 billion as authorities announced emergency funding to help in the recovery efforts. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has called Gabrielle New Zealand's biggest natural disaster this century. The required investment to reconnect our communities and future-proof our nation's infrastructure is going to be significant, and it will require hard decisions, said Hipkins at a news conference announcing an emergency $300 million New Zealand dollars, $187.08 million, cyclone relief package. Earlier on Monday, Finance Minister Grant Robertson said the total cost to government could be similar to the $13.5 billion New Zealand dollars, $8.42 billion, it spent rebuilding Christchurch after the devastating 2011 earthquake. Robertson has been appointed Cyclone Recovery Minister, in addition to his existing portfolio. The interim package provides $250 million New Zealand dollars to fix critical roads across disaster-hit regions, and a further $50 million New Zealand dollars in emergency support was set aside for businesses and primary producers. More relief and rebuilding funding from the government is expected. Hipkins also extended the national state of emergency a further 7 days to help the recovery and relief efforts. Heavy rains in coastal areas of Brazil's southeast have caused flooding and landslides that killed 36 people and dislodged hundreds of others, according to a statement from São Paulo state authorities on Sunday. Rescue workers continue to look for victims, reconnect isolated communities and clear roads, some of which remain blocked, trapping an undetermined number of tourists who traveled for Brazil's carnival celebrations. Weather forecasts show heavy rains will continue in São Paulo's coastal area, challenging civil defense and fire department rescue teams and raising the prospect of a higher death toll. The federal government determined the mobilization of several ministries to assist victims, restore infrastructure, and start reconstruction work. São Paulo state declared a 180-day state of calamity for 6 cities after what experts described as an unprecedented, extreme weather event. On Monday, São Paulo Governor Tarcísio de Freitas will meet federal officials as they coordinate the response to the tragedy, the statement said. Operations at the port of Santos, Latin America's largest, were interrupted amid wind gusts exceeding 55 kpm, 34 miles per hour, and waves over 1 meter high on Saturday, according to a local news outlet. Clinical trials for BioNTech's 22UAE.de cancer vaccines should start this year in Britain, marking an important step towards their possible sale on the open market, the German company's top executive Urs Sahin told magazine Der Spiegel. BioNTech, known for its COVID vaccine with U.S. partner Pfizer, PFE.N, is currently deciding which types of cancer it wants to test its personalized cancer immunotherapies on and the locations where it will conduct the trials, Sahin said. The company wants these therapies, which are based on messenger RNA, mRNA, technology similar to the one that underpins its COVID-19 vaccine, to soon become a regular treatment for cancer patients. We believe that this should be possible for large amounts of patients before 2030, Sahin said. The technology for this type of therapy has come a long way, he said. In 2014 we needed 3 to 6 months to create an individualized cancer vaccine, now we need 4 to 6 weeks. Our aim is to get it significantly under 4 weeks. One of the famous balloon dog sculptures by the renowned Jeff Koons, valued at $42,000, was accidentally tipped over by a visitor to an art fair in Miami and smashed into dozens of pieces on Thursday, February 16. Artist and art collector Stephen Gamson was at the Bel Air Fine Art Gallery when it happened. He filmed the fallout of the disastrous accident and posted the video on his Instagram account of people looking shocked at the many pieces of bright blue shards lying on the floor. Gallery staff asked people to stand back as they swept up the pieces of broken sculpture. The woman who knocked over the artwork was reportedly very sorry about the incident.